First of all, what was your initial reaction, Ryan, from an Oregon Ducks perspective? Someone who's dabbled in covering the sport and certainly has been a fan as long as you have been and lived in the area. What was your first reaction when you heard that arguably the two pillars of the conference, UCLA and USC, were on their way out?
Yeah, I mean, you got to feel sad a little bit for the original Pac-8, historical conference. Been out here a long time, and USC is, a really important part of our conference, as is UCLA. I mean, UCLA was probably the greatest basketball school in the history of college basketball until this last maybe Duke run or something that happened. But, UCLA is really, really respected college and university, one of the top public universities in the country. And just, you can't, I mean, it's location. I mean, at the end of the day, you just went and took two schools from Los Angeles, the biggest media market in our conference and the epicenter of our whole thing. So on that side of it, I kind of felt sad, right, a little bit. At the same time, like you said, I kind of feel like I'm in two different camps. My own channel, I kind of tried to talk this out a little bit. And I do feel like I'm in a unique situation. I was a generation that bought records to start with. We saw things go to CD. We saw them go to MP3. And now everybody just has Spotify or Apple Music or some sort of a thing. And so to see that same transition with college football, it's very similar. I mean, we, from an Oregon Duck perspective, personally, I'm in my 40s, and, for the first 10 years of my life, 15 years of my life weren't very good. And so it's been a relatively new sort of a situation that Oregon's in the position that they've been in for the last decade. Oregon, I'd say, has been the best school in football-wise, and I would say maybe even across all athletics, one of the strongest schools in our conference, and has kind of led the conference and given the conference opportunities. I mean, we've been to a Final Four in basketball and 2 national championships within the last decade or so. The first one maybe is out of the decade now, 2011. But the ideology is in relatively modern time, Oregon's been relevant. And for most of its history, it was not. And now you're in a position where you're trying to get the relevant teams to come out to your conference. And Oregon thinks maybe they have an opportunity to go to the Big Ten, but their relevancy is now, and they're talking about comparing it maybe to Washington. And I would say on paper, Washington probably has better credentials than Oregon to get into the Big Ten, better academic standing, and a much better historical tradition of winning as a program up there, not to mention a bigger media market, blah, 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 the case may be. So just everything started to kind of spiral in the last, 48 hours, or so. And you think everything's on the table. So, now I'm in a conversation just yesterday where I'm talking to guys while we're golfing, and they're talking about maybe conferences removing teams. Just like they're talking about adding teams, now they're talking about maybe, hey, you're not really helping the conference. We're going to push you out. And so maybe these, teams like an Oregon State for the Pac-12 that's looking up at the situation saying, I don't know where you're going to find a home, there might be in a similar situation to schools in other conferences, which I had not even thought of. I thought it was just going to add teams. But it's a unique situation. We knew it was coming. We knew it was coming with Oklahoma and Texas. We thought that we could persuade them to come to our conference and build our conference up. It didn't happen. It was kind of the death nail right there. You could tell they were on thin ice. And then as soon as they went to the SEC, the writing was on the wall. The Pac-12 just didn't see this one coming. I think that's the more surprising thing. So,
want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Ascent Nutrition, and their mold and mycotoxin-free coffee. Get one of these bags. Did you know that most coffees actually contain mold and mycotoxins? This stuff is pesticide-free. It tastes great. It's clean. Order it at goascentnutrition.com. That's goascentnutrition.com, and use the code on your screen, Hawkeyes. Use the code Hawkeyes at checkout to receive 10% off your total order from Ascent Nutrition. And certainly, there's going to be plenty of time, and I had some good conversations already this week with Mark Rogers, and I think he's got a good perspective on just the national scene. But for those of Iowa listeners that don't really understand the Nike element of Oregon, because that's all I hear when everybody talks about the Oregon brand. They bring up Nike. What does the Nike pull or the Nike element of things? What does that do for the brand? And does that make the Oregon Ducks program any more attractive to a conference like the Big Ten, despite maybe being slightly behind a Washington and Notre Dame, I understand, is not an AAU school, but the prestige of a Notre Dame.
The AAU thing is another whole thing. I mean, that's brought up a lot of different stuff. I made a comment on my channel about the Big Ten having the standard, but Nebraska's not in it. They were removed from it.
Right.
And I made this comment of, it sounded like I was saying, that everybody's good in the Big 12 except for the Big Ten, except for Nebraska. Of course, I don't mean that. I'm an educator. I respect the heck out of Nebraska. Great school. Like Oregon State's not in it. Amazing school. One of the best scientific schools on the West Coast. But the ideology is that, that sort of stuff now is kind of just, we've separated so much between the amateurism and the professionalism or pre-professionalism that is the college football landscape. And here you have these old school academics in charge of these institutions that are very disconnected to the athletics. I mean, look at Cal, for example. The conversation I was having today is Cal might just fold all their academics together if they don't have a conference to go to. The professors would be fine with that. That doesn't even bother them. Whereas if you go tell that to Auburn,
right.
I mean, that's a different sort of conversation. So, from the Ducks' perspective, the Ducks have made a commitment to athletics. And they've done this over the last 20 years. You talked about the Nike connection. Part of that commitment to athletics is the relationship with Nike. And Nike's seeing this as an opportunity to have a direct connection to the university system. The university system is a research and development system. Well, so is Nike. And Nike wants to stay innovative. Nike wants to stay fresh. Nike wants to get the best of the best and the young of the young to come out there and work for them. And so they look at it as a pipeline just as much as Oregon looks at it as a pipeline for revenue stream. Now, I think it is overblown. Nike and Oregon is like somehow Nike is winning games for Oregon or, making tackles. That's not the case. But Phil Knight is a humongous donor. And him and his wife have pledged unbelievable numbers out here. I mean, outside of just Oregon Ducks, they support Stanford. They support Oregon State. His wife's a Beeb. He went to Stanford Law School. He gave OHSU the biggest donation they've ever had for cancer research. I mean, this is a philanthropist across the board. He's built things on campus academically that rival what he's built over at the athletic side. I mean, they have a brand new campus for science and research. That's the Knights campus. They just opened it up. I mean, it's unreal. It looks like an airport. And so it's just this idea that, I think it is overblown where it's like, well, Uncle Phil's buying championships. Well, he hasn't bought one in football yet. And if he could buy one, he would have already. And I do think it gives Oregon a little bit of leverage. And it's a nice kind of a kitschy thing. But Ohio State's Nike budget's way bigger than Oregon's. Oregon has a close proximity to the campus and the headquarters, so they can do a lot of research and development. They can do a lot of testing. For the last 10 years or so, Oregon's had the brand new uniforms, right? Then the next year, they wheel to the NFL. They test them all with Oregon. They do all the, yes, so they have kind of connections. That doesn't mean you're going to get better recruits out of the gate. The recruits are going anywhere, and Nike's not giving them the bag either. Nike literally, as soon as they gave the NIL situation, they created this division street. All these schools have created these collectives, right? Well, Nike wanted to get as far away from that NIL thing as possible when it come to Oregon, because that's the concept. Everybody thinks, oh, people are going to come to Oregon, get that Nike money. Nike's not handing out checks, and Nike's not handing out jobs to Oregon graduates either. They have to work their way through the pipeline. There are plenty of these guys who are former athletes who get jobs at Nike, so everybody thinks, oh, it's just an automatic. No, you got to go do your work and put in your work. And Nike's only getting the best of the best. That's why they're in the situation they're in, as being such a dominant part of their market. So I don't think the Nike situation is that big of a deal. I think it's a nice connection. that Oregon has that's very organic as well. Nobody went out and made this thing happen. Nike started in Oregon. It's been here. They didn't leave. You got to give those guys a lot of credit. A lot of other companies have left where they came from. They've gone to a cheaper market. They've gone to somewhere else. Nike has not. They've reinvested in the market. They've reinvested in the universities here. And I think it's a good relationship. I do think Oregon, right now, 2022, outside of the LA schools, is the best school in the conference and the school that you would want to add the most. Doesn't mean it's the best media market. Doesn't mean it has the biggest alumni base. Doesn't mean it has the most funding. It's a school that has a lot of buzz to it. And a lot of people don't like that nationally. They call it hype or whatever. But Oregon also, in a very rural part of the country, has been very, very competitive.